So tonight I want to give you a book review, and it's the latest book that I just finished reading. Sometimes I come across different titles that intrigue me, and I look for it in the Willoughby Eastlake Library system, and if they have it, I'll get it transferred over and get it picked up. And this is one that I finished reading a little bit before Christmas, and it's called Against the Machine on the Unmaking of Humanity. And the author's name is Paul Kingsnorth, and I'll introduce him in just a quick second. But this particular review is not just kind of an evaluation of what he thinks is going on, it's also a little bit of an account of his own spiritual journey, kind of moving away from agnosticism, exploring different religions, and finally centering in on Christianity as a way of understanding his own humanity and role within the world. And it's not an easy read, but it was intriguing. And uh, since we had a nice response, as I told you last week, to the book review I did on Unraptured, I thought, well, let's do kind of the same thing here tonight. And then what I want to do is next week, I want to start a short series using the basis of another book that I just got for Christmas. It's called The Separation of Church and Hate. And it's a lot of storytelling within it. So it's not going to, I'm not going chapter by chapter through it, but what I'd like to do is just explore some of the main points of the author. And I think it's a very relevant and practical topic considering what we've been seeing over the last several years. But tonight, I want to take a look at this particular book and give to you a quick summary and then a short evaluation of where I think it's very helpful and where it falls a little bit short. So if you take a look at this guy, his name is Paul Kingsnorth. He lives in Ireland. And just by looking at him, you can kind of tell that he's an individual that has a, kind of a little bit of a rugged look and feel to his understanding of the earth and our relationship to the earth. And here's a little bit of his background. He was born in 1972, and he's had a number of different books that he has written. He's also an editor for The Ecologist and also a community, an online community called the Dark Mountain Project, that is basically trying to understand environmentalism, globalization, what challenges does that pose to us as human beings. And this particular book here, he is using a metaphor, and this is where he gets the title of it, Against the Machine. And the machine is the metaphor that he will use. If you've seen films like The Matrix or things like that, sometimes there is a metaphor or an image or language that is used to try to help us understand our relationship to the things around us. So this is a newer book that was just released this past year in 2025, and I think it has a basic core idea to it. So if you're to kind of define the machine, it would be our relationship to techno-capitalism, our relationship to AI, and some of the global systems that he feels strips away parts of our humanity, uh, small elements at a time. And he reaches back into how human beings related to each other in previous centuries. And he talks a little bit with about the importance of people and community and heritage and the importance of prayer to help each other through all the issues of life. And then he suggests that this machine that becomes kind of the cultural phenomenon distracts us from those very important elements of our humanity. And he mentions three of them. They all happen to start with the letter S: sexuality, science, and the focus we have on ourselves. And the core idea is the machine keeps pushing us away from things that often brings to us meaning and purpose and fulfillment, and pushes us toward those things that often bring more frustration. So his critique in all of this is by looking at the history of humanity, basically from the Industrial Revolution through the emergence of AI. And he talks a little bit about how this kind of encloses us, because we lose a lot of the freedoms that we had when we were more related to the land in previous centuries. And he talks a little bit about resource and land grabbing. We're seeing that right now a little bit in the news with wherever there are natural resources, there's the attempt to grab the control of those type of things. And he then connects that to the idea of want, desire. And he talks a little bit about this desire being the pursuit of endless growth, that there it has to be an ongoing things that are going north on the grid. So you look at the numbers, and you always have to be growing more and more and more. And he will suggest in this book that that's what fuels this machinery that we find ourselves in, this system, uh, and the desire for continued growth that then makes us, rather than humans, just kind of cogs in that machine to make it work. And this machinery, if you will, dehumanizes us because we're only as good as our productivity. We're only as good as our profitability, that type of thing. So he then will get to the end of the book and he talks a little bit about solution to it. But I think he could have probably talked a little bit more about this. It seems that he's approaching this book primarily from a psychological approach and helping us understand the problem. It doesn't have as many solutions that it offers as what we could probably use. He will suggest things like living on the margins a little bit more, taking care of the fact that this idea that thinking that we have an endless supply of whatever it may be, resources, energy, that type of thing. And he talks a little bit about trying to place some limits on how much technology keeps pushing us, and what effects it will have, especially with artificial intelligence. Will that actually be detrimental to us in the long run by replacing us, and taking the place of our career or our way to make a living and that type of thing. He then will talk a little bit about rebuilding community and finding meaning in traditional ways. And it doesn't have to be anything big or grandiose, but what are some of the traditions? What are some of the things that bring meaning to families and communities? And how do we uh, get back to some of that? And then he is talking a little bit at the end of the book about being a little bit more self-sufficient, rather than always in dependency upon this ongoing machinery that keeps pushing us toward profitability and those type of things. So here are the core themes of the book. And this is the one that's probably most helpful in his spiritual journey. He talks about the machine not just as a human system, but he actually talks a little bit about it as a spiritual power. Um, the machine's not neutral. It tends to shape us. It shapes our identity. It grabs at our time and our attention. And he talks about this almost being like a liturgy that we are exposed to all the time. And eventually it takes over. And there are things that often happen. Progress is great, but not without wisdom to think about where is this leading and what is the end result of all this. So the author is challenging, I guess, a bottom line here that newer is always better. And he talks a little bit about still staying grounded to morality and spirituality and not allow this to kind of be a runaway force that gets out of control. Thirdly, he talks about disembodiment and loss of place. Um, this has really come about with the use of social media, especially Facebook. We think we're connected to other people if we have so many friends or connections on social media, but we really don't have friendships per se. We just have people that are kind of spying in on each other's lives and either just appreciating it or, as in the case of a lot of social media, criticizing and throwing blame and that type of thing. So it's a real sensitive area because I think we like social media, we like things like Facebook. I know I do, but yet at the same time, do we find ourselves trying to find our identity there or find meaning there? So this leads to what he calls false salvation narratives. That is, technology being a source of salvation, bringing those things that he talks in terms of religion, not necessarily evangelicalism, but all religion, meaning, transcendence, immortality, and redemption. Those type of things that are often the common themes that are found in all kinds of religions around the world. And then finally, another core theme is he suggests that we don't try to fix it all at once, but try to be faithful to those things that bring about meaning and truth and fulfillment and community and relationship with other people and so forth. So that's kind of a way of summarizing the book. When we come back to take a little bit closer look at some of the chapters, he talks a little bit about meeting the machine. What is the machine? So this is the way he describes it. He talks about how we live in an age of constant hums, whether it's the hums of the TV or the radio or the computer. It seems as though a lot of technology has taken over so much of our life. I don't have figures on this, but um, as technology has grown, our ability to read or to pray or to study has gone down. And I don't know what the numbers are in terms of kids as they go through school and as they enter into college, whether their reading abilities are behind previous generations or not. I'm assuming that there's probably some effect one way or the other on that. And he talks about this hum that's kind of in the background of our lives, not being loud enough to frighten us, but it's steady enough to form us. Maybe another analogy we can use is sort of like the frog in the pot, that the water gets hot gradually until finally you don't realize you're in danger, that type of thing. Now, he's not talking about the machine as just technology. He's talking about how technology shapes the way we view the world. And it's a way of interacting with the world, and it's constantly being formed in us, especially with the next new thing. So when you watch the news, some news stations a lot of times will have a technology segment to it and what's the latest new technology that's coming out in the next several months and that type of thing. And what he is suggesting is that this is a way of seeing the world, and efficiency or productivity is not the end all of everything. When we kind of believe, and if we've been conditioned to think, we should be able to measure, optimize, and make everything efficient, then we have let go of what's true about all of us. We're human beings, and we can't know everything, and we make mistakes, and we fall short in so many different ways. And yet the pressure is on us to be perfect in many respects, to get rid of all of our shortcomings, and to constantly be on the move toward a greater a goal, toward a greater efficiency or productivity. So the machine is kind of what he's talking about, the triumph of the mechanical over the natural. And he's an individual that spends a lot of time in nature. And he talks a lot about the importance of being connected to nature and being connected to the things around us that are naturally beautiful, not artificially beautiful. He talks about having things be more organic in your life rather than everything being planned from A to Z. And then he talks about um, community a lot. That community is more important than systems that make us more efficient and more profitable. So what he's talking about is he sees it as kind of a force, and we don't even realize that we're exposed to it all the time. Uh, but it can take over, and it's not easy to control. And he draws a relationship to what he calls a Faustian desire for dominion over nature and human nature itself. Now, I had to look this up because I was not familiar with this, but I guess there's a German legend of Faust who sold his soul to the devil so that he could be more profitable. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that or not, but this word Faustian comes out of this legend, this German legend, which basically describes kind of a deal with the devil, if you will, making a pact with the devil, and you sacrifice everything else for temporary worldly gain. I think Jesus was onto that a little bit when he was talking about what does it profit a man or woman who gains the whole world but loses his own soul. And so uh, in his ideology, Kingsnorth is kind of critiquing this, couldn't get that out, critiquing this as a false god that we all tend to kind of pursue and follow. And it only leads to emptiness, and there's often a demise of authentic culture that rises up naturally um, in trying to colonize everything so that the whole world is McDonald's and Starbucks rather than the uniqueness of family restaurants or the heritage of different ethnicities that keep that alive, because only their culture does it excellent, better than other cultures, that type of thing. And he says, hang on to that and try to preserve authentic cultural moments. It can be food, it can be dance, it can be tradition, it can be all kinds of that type of thing. And then realize we are part of the human community, and we can enjoy all of that if we have an openness to it. So I'm going to read one passage of scripture tonight, and the passage comes out of Ephesians chapter 6. Now, Ephesians 6 is most known for the armor of God. I think we are kind of familiar with that imagery that Paul uses about the breastplate and all that type of thing. But in verse 12 is interesting. So he begins in verse 10. The paragraph begins, finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And then here's the verse. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. Now, here is that suggestion of a force that sometimes is manufactured by those in authority, but there's also a spiritual side to it as well. And our enemy is not each other. We live in one of the most divisive times in human history, and we're not each other's enemies, but you can't convince other people of that. We're all a part of the human family, and he says our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but the things that motivate flesh and blood. And so this force that is around us all the time that we're unaware of, because it's sort of like a fish swimming in water. We don't see it. And it's always telling us faster is better, bigger is safer, newer is wiser, and busier is being more faithful. Okay? And that forms us. It forms our attention, it forms our worldview. And he suggests that we slowly forget how to be human. And we slowly forget that all of us are different. None of us have the same thumbprint. None of us have the same voice print. None of us have the same life print. We're all unique. And sometimes we have mistaken progress that makes us all the same uh, for some type of salvation and a means of truth, rather than leaning into the fact that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So um, I thought this was an interesting quote by Jeff Bezos. Of course, Amazon is a source that we use, and I use it probably as much as anybody else because it's so convenient to get the things that we want. But what is behind the philosophy of Amazon, and more importantly, Jeff Bezos, who is one of the richest men in the world? This is a quote of his. He says, we have resources to build room for 1 trillion humans in the solar system. And when we have 1 trillion humans, we'll have 1,000 Einsteins and 1,000 Mozarts. So instead of taking care of the earth, which includes understanding the role of population growth and explosion, to move people into the solar system. Now, we've heard Elon Musk talk about this, wanting to put people on Mars and that type of thing. What is behind this? Well, if you can produce 1,000 Einsteins or 1,000 Mozarts, it can be a commodity that can be used for further profit. And so, what Kingsnorth would say is all of this is a desire for continued profit, control, and power by those that are already on the top. Now, whether you agree with that or not, or whether this seems a bit far-fetched or sci-fi in some way, yet at the same time, it's fascinating that one of the leading voices in our current contemporary culture has said this aloud. And anyways, come back to Kingsnorth. And he asked the question, what does progress really want? What's the motivation behind it? Now, you might agree with this, you might not agree with this, but he talks about the theology of the machine, which I think is a fascinating way of describing this. So we often talk of theology as being a religious vernacular. But he talks about the theology of the machine being disintegration, that you do not you do not stand out on your own. You only fit into the role of what the machine wants you to do. So on kind of a primitive level, far before artificial intelligence and those type of things, um, I think George Orwell was onto something in his book 1984. I see a lot of those themes that are starting to emerge within us and around us, and that's a good book to go back and reread. I think I'm going to do that this year. And I probably will be a little bit astounded as to how close it might be to where we're living. Anyways, um, he suggests that the theology of the machine is you're permitted to exist by only what you can create, what you can contribute. If you're a drain on society, then you really don't belong. Of course, what that does is push out the side door the idea of mystical experience, that there is a God that we cannot see, the transcendent, that which is above us and more powerful than us, and that type of thing. He talks about the desire of colonization, making everybody the same so that everybody can be controlled for the sake of profit. Now, this might be a little bit over the top, but I do see the point of it. He talks about when the machine creates a void, it can allow the monsters of control to rush in and take more, and we become more dependent on the machine. So let's talk a little bit about even 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Um, there was not obviously the technology of automobiles and trucks and planes. And can you imagine your life without any of those things now? We've become dependent on them. We can't exist without them. So instead of growing our own uh, produce, we just jump in the car and we go buy it, and that was dependent upon farmers that ship it, and it's brought in. The fact that you can still get strawberries right now in the middle of winter is amazing. Those type of things, because they can be shipped and transported and that type of thing, and we we are dependent on that. Whatever we want can be shipped in rather than organically. It's something that I'm invested in, that I help produce. And, to show, I'm speaking about myself here, to show how inadequate I am on that. I mean, we try to plant tomatoes and a few other things each summer, but if our life depended on that, we wouldn't live very long. I mean, it's those type of things that kind of scratches where we itch a little bit, but it's not something that can produce a livelihood. So, with that in mind, he talks about want. If this machine runs on something, the fuel of it, he talks about, is want. And want is kind of the acid, if you will. And gratification is what keeps the machine running. And the wheels of society are always oiled to keep that gratification going. So when we look back 25 years into our picture albums, and we look at what we wore, especially those of us who grew up in the 70s, we look back and we go, oh my goodness, I would never wear any of that today, because we have been shaped to like other things. But at the time, we thought we were cool. We thought it looked great. And the machine is constantly changing what we like, what we don't like. It controls fashion. It controls desire. That, boy, that coat is so old. I've had it for so long. I got to get rid of it so that I can update. Our desire is encouraged at every turn. And desire is a God given gift. It's something that is a good thing. And yet at the same time, it can be taken advantage of, especially by merchants who want the profitability of it. So with that in mind, he talks about the consequences of this ongoing machine, this hum of the culture that is constantly around us. It governs our culture, and sometimes it uproots us from our home and our commitments and so forth. So when we think about what the machine desires for you to be profitable, even to make a living, um, to how do you make a living? Well, nowadays, um, it does take two incomes, and so we're always constantly looking for the way to make more money so that we can live comfortably. But I think back even to my dad's generation. My dad worked and got a pension and was able to buy a house. And no, we didn't have all the things I have right now, but at the same time, he was able to do it on one income. But the machine takes over and the machine then pushes us. And when it does, if we're always on the outlook for a better paying job that gives to us more purchase power, then it's going to separate families because I might get a job that's offered in Chicago or LA or someplace else, and it's going to take me away from family. And as a result of that, now kids are not going to know their grandkids as well as when they lived within the same community and so forth. So one thing affects the other, and Kingsnorth is just trying to say, remember all of this, that there are sometimes things that um, might seem desirable, but what are the costs? What are the long term effects that it might have on your family? That type of thing. Um, then the other point that he makes, which is interesting, and this really does kind of dovetail with our need for medical intervention. He argues that humanity's current desire is to liberate ourselves from everything that causes suffering. And that's what propels science to continue to find things. And thank God for that. I mean, all of us know people that have been the beneficiary of the advanced technology that has allowed them to continue to live. But the philosophy behind it is you can outrun suffering. You can outrun being sick, and you can prevent all of these type of things, which is an illusion. Because there are things that happen that are beyond our control, and as a result of that, we are disappointed, or maybe even we get mad at God because now I have a disease or I have a condition that can't be corrected. And we often go, why God? As if, oh my gosh, why would he allow this to come into my life? But all we really need to do is rewind back a generation or two, and to be able to have the things that we have that allows us to live longer than previous generations should be something that we're saying, thank you, God, that you allowed the discovery of this. And I understand that my times are in your hands. I'm not guaranteed 97 years on this earth. So he's he's talking about all these things. So you when I said at the beginning, it's not an easy read, but it's very insightful. Um, he talks a little bit about our society at being attached to greatness, uh, being economic conquest, that is worldwide, that the power of a global economy has a consequence, though. It demolishes borders and boundaries, traditions and cultures, even languages. What is the lingua franca? And what is the common language which we can do business? Well, all of this kind of shapes how we see the world. And you might think this guy is kind of an Ebenezer Scrooge or something, but he's not. He's just trying to point out that these things are around us all the time. And if the final arbiter of value in life is money, then you're going to have a a caste system where certain people are allowed certain things because of they're of a higher caste than those below them. So this is what he then talks about. This is all false salvation. In other words, the machine is kind of trying to promise what religion once did, the promise of connection, the promise of knowledge, the promise of control can lead to other things. So when it's out of control, it can lead to isolation, can lead to foolishness, it can lead to anxiety. Um, and his bottom line, I think, is technology can't fix everything, nor can it bring about everything we need as human beings. So, what is the theology of Christianity? We are creatures. We'll always be creatures. We're not gods, which means we're finite, we're not infinite, and we're dust and dependent upon the Creator. So, he takes us back to the book of Genesis. And he talks a little bit about life in the garden and how life in the garden would not sit real well with our current culture. Because before the fall, as the story tells us, before they're exiled out of Eden, they were within boundaries and they had certain rhythms to life. And they were dependent upon the garden to provide for what they need. And he says this fascinating statement. He says, the machine hates gardens because gardens cannot be rushed. Gardens take time. Gardens have certain boundaries to them. Gardens have certain conditions to them that require a lot of attention. So after the fall, it's interesting. One of the things that is stated is that, we're going to work by the sweat of our brow, and there's thorns and thistles and things that need to be managed to be able to continue to live and thrive and enjoy the world that God has placed us in. Then finally, he comes to what he calls the dream of the rood. Now, I had to look this up because I didn't know what on earth he was talking about. But for him, the rood is the cross of Christ. And in his essay collections and other discussions outside the book, he contrasts the cross with the machine. And he is talking about how the machine is kind of the ultimate choice for humanity, but the cross is the opposite. It represents surrender and sacrifice and rootedness and those type of things. And the rood, another word for the cross, represents things like being humble, recognizing our limits, realizing that everyone experiences suffering to one extent or another. It involves the death of self to serve other people, and then also a return to the sacred order of creation, to be able to recognize that creation is a gift, that it is something that we should not take for granted, those type of things. So he then goes on and he says, after so many centuries of wandering, civilizations rising and falling, warring and dying, eating of the fruit of the garden repeatedly, the Creator stages this intervention, and this intervention is the incarnation. God coming to earth to show us the way back home, to show us a better way of life. And this leads to his own torture and his own death. The way of the Creator is not power, but humility, not conquest, but sacrifice. The Lamb of God takes away the sins of the world. the Lamb of God, is the one that willingly submitted to the sacrifice that was needed to point humanity in another direction. So the way back to the garden, as it says on the slide, can only be found in giving up our own vainglories and our own search for power, our unearned knowledge, and our continued pursuit of wanting uh, to be rich and continually never having enough. That there is no, gosh, there's no thank you, God, for these gifts, and being pleased with what God has given us. So he talks about Christianity as kind of being a resistance to the machine. He talks about how Christianity needs to be real. It needs to be embodied. It needs to be something that's not just theory or theology, but it needs to be something that is lived out day to day. So he mentions a few things. He talks about um, Christianity insisting on kind of a Sabbath in a world that never stops, never slows down. It insists on prayer in a world that never listens. God always is available to listen to our deepest need. On incarnation in a world that wants to escape the bodily trauma of getting older, and on resurrection, obviously, not just kind of technological immortality, but God's intervention through the resurrection, beginning with Christ. And he talks about every time we rest, we resist. Every time we pray, we refuse the lie that everything depends on us. And every time we worship, we declare that progress is not our God, that there is a God that lives above the culture and above the creation. So that brings us to kind of his final point here, and that is faithfulness, not fixing, just living out a faithful life where we're not really called to fix the world as much as we are to just be faithful within it, to be models for other people, that there are other ways of living than the constant hum of you're not enough. And so he talks about faithfulness is slower, yes. It's quieter, yes. It's often invisible. It's kind of behind the scenes, but it's often the way God works. And he says Scripture doesn't ask us to control the outcomes of all this, but just kind of live in rhythm with God. And when we do, God will take that and use it. So that kind of brings us to this conclusion, and then I'll give you an evaluation. The machine tells us that the future belongs to the powerful, the fast, and the efficient, whereas things like the Sermon on the Mount tell us the meek shall inherit the earth. And he says, against the machine, we believe that God became flesh, that love cannot be automated, that resurrection is not engineered, that the world is not saved by control, but by grace. And then he says what I said a little while ago out of Matthew 16:26. What does it profit a man or a woman if he gains the whole world, but he loses his own soul or her own soul in the process? So here's my evaluation of the book. I think it gives us some great insight into the influences and the powers around us. I think Kingsnorth seems to idealize, though, the pre-modern, pre-technological age, and doesn't acknowledge that the type of our world, the world that we live in, has changed, and there's no going back. Um, to think that we're going back to a day that is pre-cell phone or pre-automobile is just not realistic thinking. I think, though, the better way to take what he's saying is there is a rhythm, and at times we have to kind of pull back and get into rhythm with nature and appreciate the world as it once was encountered by other people. Third thing, at times I think the author is more philosophical than practical. And, I would have liked to seen him talk a little bit more now that the world has evolved to this point, um, what are some of the things that can be done just as cautionary flags, if you will, to say, hey, let's not run so fast that we don't see that this too will have certain consequences. Then finally, I think it is um, better probably to see how advancements are often manipulated for more profit and power, rather than trying to prevent advancements and technology from advancing. How is this going to be used by those who have the power or the resources to control it? So I like what it's not about one philosophical system over another. It's just kind of the way the world works, and are we understanding how it works? So I ran across this quote by G.K. Chesterton. Has an excellent book called Orthodoxy. He is a brilliant theologian, but in it, he says this. He says both capitalism and socialism were systems in which small numbers of people owned everything and dictated to the rest of us how we should live. End quote. So it's not the system itself, whether it's capitalism or socialism or even communism. It's about those who have the power to manipulate it, and with that, there is the reminder that those that are manipulating it are doing it for their own well-being. And if we can stay alert to that, it might lead us down different paths. A couple of years ago, we did a short little series with some video components to it that talked a little bit about global warming and what some of the things that were being done around the world by other cultures to try to slow that down a little bit. So it might be recycling, it might be other things like that that can be very practical. It just might be the awareness that there are people that will certainly take advantage of these areas, and um, are we aware of their motivations? And if they are in positions where we're voting them into these positions of power, are we looking beyond with wisdom where this might lead us? So I want to bring us back up and see if there are some questions, thoughts that you might have on the book. I think it wasn't an easy read, but it was a good read, and I'm glad I read it. And it also kind of helps to see the way that people that live on in other parts of the world, in this case Ireland, kind of view things. Because I think every culture kind of has their own kaleidoscope, you might say, through which they look and see how the world is colored and so forth. So, do you have any thoughts, any comments, any questions on this one-off study tonight? Anything?
What do you said the book was a little challenging. What do you mean in that sense?
Um, in the sense of there will be paragraphs in it where you might have to slow down and you might have to go, where's that language coming from? What does it mean? So the example I gave you on the slides was the Faustian. Okay, I didn't know what that was. Um, well, it's related back to kind of a German guy or legend named Faust that made a deal with the devil to get his way. So you're going to run into those that'll be a little bit challenging. And if you're not willing to stop and kind of look it up, you can kind of maybe miss the point, or you might go, I'm just not going to bother, that type of thing. So that's what I mean by challenging. I don't mean that the vocabulary that he uses is non understandable. I'm just saying that some of his references I
Mhm.
was not familiar with.
Okay.
So, anything else?
One of my faculty members at Case was her entire scholarship was around Faust.
It was what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Her entire research and scholarship was about that topic.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Hmm.
And did she write an essay or a dissertation on it?
I presume maybe even dissertation or
Yeah,
I don't recall, I'm not sure about
yeah.
that.
Did you ever have any conversations with this individual about?
Yeah, not
Did
so
you?
much about that topic, but
Uh-huh. Yeah, good. So there's people around us that are interested in continued understanding and research of this. I don't know why. I just ran across that title and it just kind of grabbed my attention. So, and it was a new book. It was
mhm,
published in 2025. So I thought, and I and when I went on to the Willoughby Eastlake library system, it wasn't backed up with holds. I go, oh, that's good. I'll just send for it, and
mhm,
yeah, and it was transferred right away. So sometimes if a book is new, you'll be waiting 3 or 4 months before it's available.
mhm.
To to read it and so forth. So anybody else? Any other thoughts? All right. Well, if not, that's where we're going to stop for tonight. We'll start a short 6 week series next week on the new publication. Um, and I'll show you what it's like in case you run across it in the library and you want to read it or whatever. It's called Separation of Church and Hate by John Fugelsang. And he's a comedian, actually. So I'm looking forward to this because the reviews of it said he makes great points in a humorous way. So I think that'll be fun. But I'll take some of the insights and we'll take a look at some of those things beginning next week. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah.
Thank
Have a
you.
great evening.
you.
Okay.
Stay
Stay
warm.
warm. Stay
Yep.
warm.
Yeah.
Don't hurt
You
your back
too.
shoveling snow.
It-
Those
It's
Yeah,
of
it's
you who are
very
up
bad
here.
out. It's very bad out. The wind is blowing, so be
Is
safe
it?
going home.
All right.
Larry and Brenda, are you going to be at
Well, I
McKinley
just
tomorrow?
slipped.
Yeah, I'll be there if the weather's good.
Well, if Willoughby East Lake schools are closed, so is McKinley.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right.
And
Very good.
also is on Tuesday. Well, Monday we're closed for the holiday, and Tuesday is Taco Tuesday night. If you want to go to the Eagles Club on Tuesday.
Okay. All right. Free meal. So
Well, I don't know if it's free or not. It was one time, but I don't know.
oh, okay, gotcha. All right, guys. Thanks so much for the update,
Night.
and we'll
All
see you
right.
soon. Okay.
Night.
Take care. Good night.
Night.
Yep.
Night.